Hey, it's Chris, Liege Games. Hopefully by the time this video posts, I will be at 600 subscribers. So thank you again. That's amazing. Freaking ridiculous. Cannot say it enough. 3 new Patreons as well. Patreonagers, whatever you want to call them. Thank you. I really appreciate it as well. I'm going to try and live up to what you've seen so far and hopefully just put out more of the same if that's what you like. So let's talk about upcoming Kickstarters in the very end of January, but also the first semi-part week of February. Now, there's a couple that have just sort of been out in the nebulous. No one really knows. I think one that didn't really have a date is Candy Wars. I covered that last time. I'm not going to go over it again. There are still plenty in February that are coming that no one really knows. There's a lot of February dates that are unknown at this point, and we'll see what ends up happening. If it's like some of the ones in January where they get pushed into later months, or if all of a sudden like Radlands all of a sudden announces and boom, there it goes. Those are the ones that are just a big unknown at this point. I will also be putting out a video like I did for January, the 3 that are huge on my radar that you should be aware of. And then I'm also going to be putting out a what did I back in January? What also maybe is the best crowdfunding campaign? Define that as you will in January that either launched or finished. You can maybe tell me your thoughts. I'll tell you my thoughts. We'll compare notes, like studying for a test. Anyway, but let's talk about next week. Next week, again, I don't really know what to expect. It was sort of like this week where a few things flew under the radar. I'm going to try and give you complete coverage as much as I can when those launch so that, you know, you don't have to do as much investigation. Maybe I can do a little bit for you. So if you like that, let's do it. So let's talk about what we got on the horizon. So first up that I know of is February 1 Maquis. Now this is a reprint of, this is a very unique combination, a solo worker placement game. Again, those two things don't do anything for me, especially in combination, but I have sort of heard rumors about it maybe like 6 months, a year ago, that people were looking for this game and it's just out of print. You just can't find a copy hardly anywhere. There are now actually a few copies on Board Game Geek, but they're going for like $60 when I think this game was maybe a third of that when it originally funded in Kickstarter. It was the 2013 Board Game Geek Print and Play of the Year. So it's got a relatively good pedigree. Now, what are you doing? You're basically competing against the game itself to prevent the Nazis from occupying your city and destroying it. And you are having variable buildings, workers placed down to do missions, to prevent things from being blown up, to save things. Apparently, so February 1 Maquis. Speaking of one that also has a bit of an underground feel and a bit of a underdog feel, if you will, this is Coraquest. Now, I believe this is actually basically the print and play finalized version of a family game that a dad and a daughter named Cora, if you hadn't guessed it, produced a dungeon crawl. And it sort of hit the internet and sort of took over a little bit for the hotness for a while. And they have decided to actually publish it on Kickstarter. It is a family co-op dungeon crawler, 1 to 4 player. And as you would expect, with the family theme, they have gone more of the family, kid-friendly, kid-drawn-esque route in terms of the art. I don't really know how much of this game, I think they did a print and play, but I don't know how much of this game is actually out there in terms of gameplay. So, oh, there you go. I mean, I think this game is interesting to look at because it sort of fills this niche, which isn't a huge niche, mind you, but it's a niche where it bridges a little bit of the, my kids are old enough that the Haba games aren't going to satisfy them, but they're not old enough that I can play with them the true dungeon crawlers, the true, that sort of depth and deeper gameplay mechanics on that. The question is this going to be received in the same manner as it sort of was initially? Oh, that's really sweet, that's really cute, that's awesome that you guys did this together. Are people going to pay for that, though? That is where sometimes I see the disconnect on Kickstarter. Like, hey, that's really awesome that you did that, but I'm not really interested in it, even though I think it's really cool. And I have no idea. I have no idea whatsoever on this. It's going to be an interesting test of the market. Apparently, what they have said is they actually crowdsourced the art from the fans and the community to make the art on this cover that I showed. So that's kind of cool. Again, I don't know if it's going to be for me. It's going to be relatively straightforward. It may be the next level. My kids might be just a little bit past that by the time this actually went to retail, because my oldest is almost 7 and he can read and he really wants to play daddy games. So it might pass him. It might be better for my 5-year-old who is not quite there yet, who is still sort of figuring out Splendor. But it's sort of this tweener zone, and I could see it go either way. I think, what was it? Sort of the worker placement-esque, the dungeon crawl-esque version of Creature Comforts, which raised a ton of money as sort of this intro, cutesy worker placement game for families to play the end of last year on Kickstarter. Again, something I passed on, worker placement. Not teaching my kids that. None of that in my house. Anyway, but is it going to be the equivalent of that for the dungeon crawl? And frankly speaking, again, I have no idea. But that is going to be on February 1st. It'll be a nice test of the market, so we'll see what comes of it. Going completely opposite in the spectrum is Cult of the Deep. Now, if you haven't had enough Cthulhu, we're going to give you a little bit more here. Now, this is going to be a little bit different. As opposed to the worker placement, as opposed to the tower defense, as opposed to the dungeon crawl action battler, this is more of a social deduction game. It reminds me a little bit of Murder in Hong Kong in the sense that everybody has their own factions, root out the factions, kill the Kabbalists and the heretics, and survive, essentially. But you have these other factions, the Kabbalists, the faithful, who are trying to protect the high priest, but also the heretic, who's just, burn everything to ground. Chaotic evil, I guess, if you will, or chaotic neutral, which would that be? Anyway, I was never very good at that. I'll pull up a meme later and check it out. I don't know. We've seen the rise of this is now a 4 to 8 player social deduction type game. We're seeing a lot more of the variability thrown in with the social deduction now. Veiled Fate, Human Punishment. I have seen sprinklings of comments around the internet of this, and I mean, obviously, it's got some hype. Again, this is one where I am not a huge bigger player count person, and I'd like to have 2 or 3 more games like this, so when I do have more people over, it'd be nice to have something that's very easy and cohesive to get to the table. But I think this is a rule book situation where show me the rule book, because social deduction games, I cannot depend on the gameplay video, and that's the different thing about social deduction than a lot of other games, is that the group matters more than what the gameplay actually looks like. And so I need to see it on rules, not just how much fun other people are having. That's my biggest criticism about Shut Up and Sit Down, is they have a very specific group that shows that we're always having fun with these types of games. And that is just not the case with my group of having the same fun in the same type of games as them, as great a job as they do as presenting it. Like, they are fabulous. There's a reason they're at the top of the mountain. But a lot of people, I feel like, get sucked into they're having fun, ergo I'm going to have fun. That was my initial thought too when I was introduced to them, but the more I watched, the more I compared their likes and my likes, the more I saw the divergence. So that's why I think it's a rule book rather than a gameplay video for me. Now, the one thing you should know about this game that sort of sets it apart, there is some dice rolling here. You can see the tokens, you can see the powers, you can see what you're sort of doing, different characters, different powers, different events, and here are your dice. And so the thing with this is you're going to be rolling dice and deciding where to allocate these on some of these other things that I just mentioned. Your character has a class card, and it also has a once a game sigil, or basically special power that you can use once per whole game. The other thing that I think, a lot of social deductions, especially with elimination, the biggest criticism is that once you're out, and you just gotta sit around and be like, you are a wraith still in this game, so you still have the ability to influence what is going to be going on in the game. Again, how, in what manner, how much do some of these things affect the overall dynamic and balance? And I think that's the rulebook situation. So again, it's a different take on things, so it's definitely worth eyeing and worth checking out on at launch. But is it going to be for you? I don't know. These are hard to call social deduction games. These are just hard to call in general in terms of appeal. Next up, also launching on February 2, is Posthuman Saga, the Journey Home expansion. And this is a continuation of the Posthuman Saga from several years ago. So what is Posthuman Saga? Posthuman Saga is a post-apocalyptic world where, it's fighting, it's managing resources, it's surviving. You have one of the last civilizations or fortress in Europe after the collapse of society, basically. What you're doing is you're hoping to reconnect, scavenge, connect to other resources and fortresses out there in terms of surviving better and exploring. It is more of a sandbox style game. You can see here, obviously, missions, objectives, things you're trying to do as you go along. They have crafted it as sort of story scenes, and the initial base game had about 100 of these, where they really emphasized the quick nature of them and the duality between the journey across, but also the quick iconography and situations that you're coming across as you're doing this. And so depending on what you do, gets you a different answer or event. So you can see here a little bit of a better, more scaled back version with the dice, with the markers, with the sort of the exploration on the board in the modular tile system. And you can see that this is, you're exploring and you are doing, like I mentioned, the sandbox sort of scenario. And so what does this add? I mean, this is an expansion to that. Now the question is, I don't see here, is it standalone? It does not look like it's standalone just by the description. So you're going to be just adding more of that. New mechanics, new, more alternate ways of scoring, and more player interaction with more missions and a heavier tactical experience, they're saying. So I don't know. I'm not familiar with this base game. I've seen it in passing, but I never have experienced it, nor really given it a good depth. So I can't speak to what it would be comparable to right now. It's definitely up in my type of genre, crawl, sandbox-y, apocalyptic area of interest. But beyond that, I don't know if it would be of interest comparatively to a lot of the other things that are already sucking me in and drawing me in for sure that I really know that I like. And especially when you're coming at the tail end of 2 other campaigns that I am already heavily invested or interested in, as well as in between a couple that are coming up later in the month or sometime in Q1. So that's a tough spot to be in, but 7.3 rating on Board Game Geek means that it's got the following, means that it's going to, be on people's radar and it's going to raise some money. Now this next one, but Embryo Machine, the board game. This is actually a port from Japan. It's already out in Japan, and as you can see, just illustrated by the sort of anime-style mechs, that is what you're doing. You're battling with mechs in this game. This is also launching February 2. So it's competitive, up to 6 players, free for all. You're customizing your mech, you're fighting, you're having different ways of customizing the weapons and the armor and the upgrades. Here you can see a little bit more of the Japanese pictures. So you can see that it's going to be standees, it looks like, unless they're going to upgrade to miniatures in the campaign. I hope not, because usually these Japanese games that try and do miniatures, it jacks the price up probably 2 or 3 times what I would expect it to be. But you can see that there are different units that you're using, I believe double-sided even, and you can start to see, just even without the translation here, you can start to see all of these different areas that you're going to be equipping or dealing with, and the various stats to go along with that, and the other cards that you're going to be using to power up your mech here. I hesitate very much on these games because, again, I'm not a 1v1v1 sort of a battle royale type person. It doesn't have the appeal to me as a team game or a co-op does in that sense, because I think my group has enough trouble with King of Tokyo when people get eliminated, let alone something like this that's going to be significantly more complex. You're going to have to manage it all yourself, and elimination may prove to be significant time on the sidelines in the meantime while you're waiting for things to finish up. I am a huge proponent, if you look back at my early videos, I am a huge proponent of the ported games in, especially from Japan, because I think these guys do very creative, unusual things that we are not used to seeing over with the Western designers primarily, and I mean that from an Americas as well as a Europe side of things. So I am always interested to see how it actually flows and what it actually looks like. But again, the biggest problem with a lot of these ports have been the price. You can buy the Japanese version for like 40 equivalent US dollars, but the Kickstarter might be like 90 plus shipping. And so that has been one of my biggest dilemmas in supporting these is, you might not be able to get it elsewhere. You might not be able to even get it in English, but it's going to cost you an arm and a leg for what it is comparatively to a lot of the other English and European design games. But I mean, I'm a fan of the anime style already. There's a lot of variability. There's a lot of ways to customize it. It's basically Gundam Wing, the board game in that sense. So the other one that came out or tried to fund recently, Dragon Gias, Again, another port, another mech versus monster. Tried to do miniatures, did not work out, did not get anywhere near its funding goal. So hopefully this one does a little bit better. But I think, again, the biggest concern on this one is going to be price point. If you price it well, these games sell very well on Kickstarter. If you do not price it well, they do not. We'll see. So I'm just going to touch on a few other games because that is really all I have confirmed to be launching next week. I know I'm going to be missing a few. I know other people probably have more inside sources than I do, but I'm going to touch on a few that are basically Q1 that people have said, or February. So again, a big unknown, but expect maybe an update sometime later in the next week or two, or 3 even, depending on what gets announced. And so there's probably about a dozen games at least that do not have dates that I can look at right now and say, what the heck is actually going to go on? When is it actually going to launch? So Eternal Palace is one of these. Eternal Palace is this game where the Eternal Palace has been destroyed by an earthquake. You are using your workers to allocate resources and slowly rebuild it better and faster than your opponents. You then earn tokens to reflect that your efforts are more well received than other people's. You're doing it better. And then you can unlock areas to paint a layer of your work showing that you were there. So who gets the most reconstruction? Who gets the most favor of the emperor? Who wins? Again, no date, but it is announced as in February. One of the other ones on my top 10 more anticipated games of 2021, Quantum Shock, where it's the dungeon crawler with the time travel element, jumping between dimensions, was initially supposed to be in February as well. I may try and go on their Facebook group later this weekend and try and figure out if they've got a date more firmly set up, but I have not seen anything and nothing has come out, but the original date was supposed to be in February. Another one high on my list of things to be watching out for, Soul Raiders. So, I mean, it's a campaign, it's a dungeon crawl, it is just a massive modular role-playing-esque game, and it just looks absolutely fantastic. It just narrowly did not make my cut for the top 10, but you can see just here, just looking at this artwork and the campaign style and what you're going to be doing in here, it is looking really impressive. And I've heard some rumors, I think Jeremy from Man vs. Meeple had some thoughts on it already of being one of his most anticipated, and he and I share a lot of mutual interest when it comes to these games, so if he's super interested in it, it's probably going to be high on my radar as well. Initially it was a February announce date, but we haven't heard anything recently, so we'll see where it ends up. Here you can see some of the miniatures. You can see a little bit of the background on the Board Game Geek. So Ancestral Order, Mighty Warrior Mages, bound saving the world. And so, you know, what's happened with them since, basically, is what's going on. You've got a little background here. You've got a little bit of iconography on the cards. And so we'll see a little bit of what happens. And you have different mechanisms that each characters are using, persuasion and precision. So again, how much D&D influence and tabletop RPG thrown in with the sort of dungeon crawl campaign style-esque. So I have no idea. The second I hear it, you'll hear it too. Sankokushin! So this is another one. Obviously, this is at the top of my hype list. You can check out my analysis that I posted of the New Year's update on my channel. But again, this one was listed supposedly as Q1. So where is it? Feudal Japan campaign, multi-layered stories, elements, interactions, NPCs, boss battling, KDM style game. Go check out the other video. That's all I got to say. Those are all my keywords that I can throw around here. So Q1, hopefully. Because then we'll maybe have it by the 2023. Planet Fulcrum, again, another game that's out there. February date, 1 to 4 player area control style game with a tech tree. So, and you're using a deck in this game to actually drive the battle. So that's a little bit different. Here you can see a little bit of the tech tree and what you're going to be placing down in the various slots and the abilities. And you can see a little bit of the map here with standees. So a different take on the area control game. Not a big area control person, but again, I like it. I like the artwork, so it's going to get looked at. You catch the eye, you'll get me for the rest, hopefully. Velocity Vanguard, cooperative, competitive. It reminds me sort of the Space Battler, just in terms of ship navigating. A physics-based space game with gameplay that is driven by missions where you're either in teams or it's sort of the Space Battler. I think, what was it? It was Star Force? Anyway, I forget what it was, but there was 1 or 2 within the last year or so that looked very similar in terms of space battles, individual missions, and moving through a grid-like system. And I'm sure someone in the comments will remind me of what it is. But again, this is not the first one out there like this, and it's definitely going to run into comparisons of those previous games when you're so thematically and stylistically the same in terms of ship, battling, space, missions, campaign. Just like we compared dungeon crawls, you're going to compare something like this. No idea the date, no idea the time or the price. This is not my type. Again, this is not my type of game, but this is a potential big draw for people that are looking for something space exploration-ish, a little bit of maybe even 4X-ish. I don't know how much of that is going to be this, but it's going to have a couple of the X's. So we'll see. Wutaki! Middleweight worker placement game out of Germany. Again, I'm going to cover it because it needs to be covered, but I have no problem saying worker placement. You've already heard my thoughts on that. So they've angered a giant monster. They're worshiping this monster as their god, and the big volcano is going to erupt because of it. So they need to basically prevent it from happening, preventing the world from ending and the volcano burning things down. And you each have an elemental power that you're using to prevent this from happening. So you can see a little bit of the board. You can see all the worker placement slots, and that's a lot of slots there. You can see your own workers, and you can see some sort of other token here at the bottom. So I'm not sure quite what you're going to be doing in this game, but it says middleweight. And this doesn't look middleweight to me, but again, I am not a good evaluation of these things. So it might be a lot heavier than it appears on first glance. It's got a unique theme. It sort of takes that child cartoonish trope where the mountain's going to burn down and we got to sacrifice the virgin to prevent it, but done in a different way where you're using your elemental powers instead. Sometime in February, I believe. So we'll see when it pops up. Quodd Heroes. Speaking of things going to pop up in February, Quodd Heroes, the second edition, where you're taking your cube-shaped heroes and going through a obstacle course. You are now getting a second edition of this, and you'll see what comes with it, because as per Kickstarter rules and regulations, there has to be something new with a reprint. And so we'll see what is new with this and what isn't. So basically, it's a bunch of scenarios. You get your little they describe it as Smash Brothers, Mario Kart, and Legend of Zelda all in one, where you can either race, you can do capture the flag, or uncover secrets. Lots of player in action, board changing, cube mechanism, where you can assign different powers and abilities to the different sides of your cubes. My biggest concern with this, and why I didn't originally even look at it, is I think that's a little bit fiddly, but I've heard relatively good things about this being fun. I just never really got into it. It was never something that really struck my interest, but you can see just kind of what you're getting here off of the previous stuff. You know, all the different modular game boards, all of the different tokens and sides that you can put on these. So I think it's probably worth a look just to see, now that I have a better feeling of what I like and what I don't like. But again, I don't know if it's going to be for me at all. I would not heavily bank on it. And it's one of those where, like with this past week, I hope that it has no interest to me, because I don't need any more things that are going to catch my interest more than the things that I already have. So last but not least, and I'm not sure, I have the feeling that this one might actually launch next week as well too. The forums say that within the first several days of February, and that is a universal truth. It takes the Regency era, which is a time frame from 1795 to approximately 1837, and it's a game of courtship, as you can see by the picture and the text here. So you're looking for a mate, hence courtship. So they've got a lot of mechanisms going on this, so I'm not really sure what at all this is going to look like. So you've got card drafting, you've got dice drafting, you've got hand and pool management, tableau building, set collection, multi-use combo cards, risk management, and asymmetric abilities for more than 200 characters. So that is a lot in the game description there, and I don't really know what to make of that. They have a Kickstarter page up, and it's only got 77 people following it, so maybe it's not as hyped as I thought, but we'll see. There's a lot going on with that description that I just said, and I really don't know how this is going to fare, because it previously launched and failed, I believe, in 2019 for more of a US distribution, and so I don't really know what to expect with this. This is a very, very broad game, and my concern with that is just that if you're trying to do too much, you're trying to do too much. You need to focus. It's like games that have co-op, semi-co-op, competitive, solo. You know, pick one or two of those and focus on those and put all your energy and efforts into those, because otherwise it always feels like one or two of those modes don't quite get fully fleshed out. Not every game needs to appeal to every player count and every style. So stay within what you can do to the best of your ability. however many of those that it may be. You cannot please everyone. Pleasing everyone will end up invariably not pleasing a significantly more if the game is not really good in the first place. Okay, I'm going to sneak one last one in that I just came across very last minute, so that's why it's out of order. This is Core Worlds Empires. This is also launching on February 2. What is it? Let's take a look. You may have been familiar when I said Core Worlds, because Core Worlds is a card game, a deck building card game in the first place. The original Core Worlds is a deck building, frontier exploring game where you're trying to expand your empire through your cards. There's an expansion that came out in 2012. There's a lot of exclusives that I think have been sort of grail for a lot of these games because they really haven't been reprinted. And so now we have Core Worlds, the Empires, which is not the card game, but they're making it in the same realm of things, in the same universe, but it is actually a worker placement game. Now, the interesting thing is, if you're interested in the core game of Core Worlds, they have said that the stretch goals and one of these Board Game Geek forum posts are actually going to be the non-exclusive reprints of the bonus cards and the exclusive reprints. So if you're a fan of it, it might be worth looking at. But if you just want those, the pricing looks to be a little bit steep unless you're going to be getting some of the base game of either Empires or the original. So what is it? 1 to 4 players. You got your solo play for the solo players. And you're, again, one of these factions trying to basically control the galaxy. You're starting with a certain number of worlds under your control, and you're gradually trying to expand your reach through worker placement. You visit these worlds, you do resources, and you gradually try to recruit them. You can see that this is a very unique board, a circular board, and you start out, it says, with one of these worlds that's near the core, and then so you're working your way out from the center. So everyone starts relatively equidistant from these areas, but in the civil war that has sort of gone on that split you into your factions originally, these planets are neutral or undiscovered, and you're trying to recruit them to your cause. So beyond that, I don't think there's a whole lot known, but it's launching on February 2. If you were a fan of Core Worlds originally, it might be worth checking out to get the stuff that you don't have. Or if you liked that universe, excuse the pun, in general, it's another worker placement. How different is it going to be? I have no idea, but I don't see many worker placements with a circular board. So time will tell. So that's it. I mean, I covered a lot of other games that I don't really expect to see within the next week or two even. But I think, again, just like January, a lot of information is still being held very close to the vest. And I think we're going to see a lot of things pop up. I mean, the second and third weeks of February, I think, are going to be much more loaded, especially with some bigger names like Bloodstone. And who knows when big things like Sankokushin are going to drop, because it's probably going to part the sea for other people trying to avoid things like that. But I have no idea. Because, like I said, this past week, with games like Human Punishment and, a couple like that invariably surprise me and are trying to steal my money away from the things I was planning on getting in the first place, it's going to make it tough. There's always a couple of those. And frankly speaking, I love it because I love being surprised. I love being surprised by the ingenuity. I love being surprised by things that I wasn't sure or didn't even think I would like that I end up liking. So it also forces me to think about culling games from my collection. That's a whole nother video and topic. Okay, so thank you for watching. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for getting me to 600. That is freaking fantastically awesome. To the moon, as they say right now in the whole GME Wall Street bets thing. Anyway, that's a whole nother conversation as well. Thank you. Shout out to again. Shout out again to those supporting me on Patreon. Thank you so much. Going to keep you guys updated on there too. And let me know what you think. What else am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing stuff. I'm sure that other stuff is going to pop up. What are you excited about in February? Let's talk. See you in the comments. Stay classy out there.